"Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to move." The voice was professionally calm, but the words landed with the blunt force of an insult in the buzzing air of the gymnasium. They were directed at a man who sat perfectly still, a rock of granite amidst a sea of celebratory chaos. Master Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Thorne didn't turn his head. He didn't flinch. His eyes remained fixed on the distant stage where his son, Jamal, stood in a line of crimson gowns. The rows of medals on his chest, a constellation of past wars and quiet valor, glittered under the harsh fluorescent lights. His dress blues uniform was more than clothing. It was a testament, a silent history of a life lived by a code of honor that the man standing over him could not begin to comprehend. This was the flashpoint, a high school graduation, a plastic chair, a father's pride, and a challenge to his very right to be there. How does a man who has commanded battlefields, a man whose voice has rallied troops in the heart of a firefight, respond when the battle comes to him here, in the most sacred of civilian spaces? How does he honor a promise to his dying wife when the world tries to push him aside? This confrontation, however, didn't begin in that row of flimsy seats. It began 9 hours earlier, on a strip of sun-beaten Texas highway, inside the rumbling heart of a 1972 Dodge Charger. The engine's V8 thrum was a prayer he knew by heart. This wasn't just a car, it was a time machine. It had been Elena's. Every mile was a conversation with her memory, every press of the accelerator a promise being fulfilled. He had promised her, in the sterile silence of a hospital room, her voice a fierce whisper against the steady beep of a machine counting down her final moments. "You will not miss this, Marcus. You will be there for our boy. You will be his rock." So he drove. He didn't fly, because flying was for getting from one point to another. Driving this car was for remembering. He could feel the echo of her laughter in the engine's roar, see the phantom image of her hand on the dashboard, drumming along to a song on the radio. He was here now, not just as a Marine, but as a husband keeping his final vow. He pulled into the parking lot, the engine falling silent with a final, shuddering sigh. The rumble of the 1972 Dodge Charger's V8 engine was a prayer Marcus Thorne knew by heart. It was a low, guttural vibration that traveled up through the frame, through the worn leather of the driver's seat, and settled deep in his bones. This wasn't his car. It had been Elena's. Every mile he drove was a conversation with her memory. Every press of the accelerator a promise kept. 9 hours he had been on the road, a straight shot from the disciplined order of Camp Lejeune to the sun-baked chaos of a Texas high school parking lot. He could have flown, but flying was sterile, disconnected. The road was real. The road was where he felt the echo of her laughter, the phantom warmth of her hand on the dashboard. He had promised her, in the hushed antiseptic stillness of a hospital room, where the only sound was the beep of a machine counting down her final heartbeats. "You will not miss this, Marcus. You will be there for our boy. You will be his rock." He was here, for Jamal, his rock. He pulled into a space near a chain-link fence, the engine falling silent with a final shuddering sigh. For a long moment, he didn't move. He reached into the breast pocket of his uniform, his fingers finding the familiar cool weight of a small silver locket. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He knew the image inside. Elena, her dark hair wild in the wind, holding a baby-faced Jamal, both of them beaming with a light that felt a universe away. Master Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Thorne, a man who had faced down threats on 5 continents, took one slow, deep breath to steady himself against the overwhelming force of a single memory. Then, with the practiced, economical movements that had defined his life, he stepped out of the car. The heat hit him like a physical blow, but his uniform, the immaculate dress blues of the United States Marine Corps, remained a fortress of composure. It was more than fabric and thread. It was a second skin, a language understood without words. Every crease was a story of discipline, every polished button a testament to a code of honor. He wasn't wearing it to show off. He was wearing it because for a day this important, a day that marked the closing of one chapter of his son's life and the beginning of another, he could not conceive of presenting himself as anything less than the sum of his convictions. As he walked toward the gymnasium entrance, heads turned. He was a monolith of purpose in a sea of pastel-colored dresses and polo shirts. He saw the glances, the quick, curious appraisal, the flicker of respect, the occasional subtle nod. He acknowledged none of it. His focus was singular, his mission clear. Find his seat. Watch his son. Honor his wife. The gymnasium was a roaring cavern of sound and emotion. The air, thick with the scent of popcorn and proud parents, vibrated with an energy that was both joyous and overwhelming. A volunteer, a flustered woman with a clipboard, glanced at his ticket, then at his uniform, and her expression softened. "Right this way, sir. 3rd row. And thank you for your service." Marcus simply nodded, the phrase washing over him without purchase. He navigated the crowded rows, his movements precise, a vessel of calm in a turbulent sea. He found the seat, a flimsy plastic chair that felt impossibly fragile, and sat. His back was ramrod straight, a posture so ingrained it required no thought. And then he saw him. Across the polished wooden floor, in a sea of identical crimson gowns, was Jamal, his son. Taller than Marcus remembered, his shoulders broader, a shadow of a man already visible in the boy's frame. A tidal wave of time washed over Marcus. He saw Jamal's first steps, wobbling across a living room floor. He heard his first word, a garbled attempt at "dada." He felt the ghost of a tiny hand clutching his finger. And he saw Elena, watching with him, her eyes sparkling with a love so fierce it could have powered a star. All of it, the joy, the sacrifice, the deployments that pulled him away, the quiet homecomings, the crushing, final loss. It all converged into this single, potent moment. The boy he had raised, the boy Elena had shaped, was about to graduate. Marcus's world narrowed, the noise of the gym fading into a distant hum. There was only the stage, his son, and the cool, silent weight of the locket against his chest. We've all been in a situation that felt sacred, a moment where the outside world is supposed to fade away. And we've all felt that spark of injustice when someone tries to shatter that moment. What happens next is a testament to a strength quieter than shouting, a loyalty deeper than words. If you believe in that quiet strength, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. Because the lesson in honor that is about to unfold is one you won't want to miss. The first notes of the national anthem silenced the room. A collective reverence fell over the crowd. As hands went to hearts, Marcus simply stood, his entire being a silent, powerful salute. This anthem wasn't just a song to him. It was the soundtrack to his life, the melody that played under the roar of helicopter blades, the quiet hum of a Navy vessel, the final, ragged breaths of fallen brothers. When the last note faded and the applause rippled through the gym, Marcus remained standing for a beat longer, lost in a private moment of reflection. As he sat, he saw them. 2 men, clad in black polo shirts bearing the insignia of stalwart security, were moving down his aisle with an air of unearned authority. They weren't looking for anyone. They were looking for him. Marcus watched their approach without turning his head, tracking them in the periphery. He had assessed them before they had even reached his row. The shorter one, Miller, had the rigid posture of a man who loved a rulebook, especially when it gave him power over others. The taller one, Davis, moved with a lazy swagger, his boredom a thin veil for his contempt. They stopped, their bodies blocking his view of the stage. "Excuse me, sir," Miller said, his voice polite but firm. "This entire section is reserved and it's full. We're going to have to ask you to move." Marcus met his gaze. "I have a ticket for this seat." Davis let out a short, dismissive sigh. "Yeah, well, there seems to have been a mix-up. We need the seat, standing room in the back, by the concession stand." The insult was quiet, but it was sharp. Standing room. Like he was an overflow problem, an inconvenience to be managed. Marcus felt a cold anger begin to coil in his gut, but he held it in check. 30 years in the Corps had taught him that the man who controls his emotions controls the battlefield. He reached into his pocket, his movements slow and deliberate, and presented the ticket. "Third row, Section C, family seating, issued by the school." Miller barely glanced at it. "Look, sir, I'm not going to argue with you. The list we have says the seat is for someone else. We need you to cooperate." This was no longer about a mistake. This was a deliberate act of dismissal. Nearby, the woman with the elegant gray hair, Mrs. Albright, watched the unfolding scene. The gold star on her blazer seemed to catch the light. She saw the uniform, the quiet dignity of the man, the casual disrespect of the guards. She saw it all, and her heart ached with a familiar pain. She saw a reflection of her own son, who had worn a different uniform but carried himself with that same profound stillness. She knew she should say something, that her position on the school board gave her a voice. But she was frozen, trapped in the web of social propriety, a good person witnessing a small, sharp injustice and not knowing how to break the silence. Marcus held the guard's gaze. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The quiet power in the gymnasium was not coming from the speakers or the stage. It was emanating from the man in the third row. "I'm not moving," he said. The words a simple, unshakable statement of fact. Davis's eyes narrowed, taking in the rows of medals, the sharp creases, the unwavering stare. He saw the uniform, but he did not understand the man. And in that moment of ignorance he made a critical error. He chose to escalate, to push a man who had made a lifetime of holding the line. And in doing so, he was about to awaken the sleeping echoes of a brotherhood he couldn't possibly comprehend. The tension in the third row wasn't just a feeling anymore, it was a physical presence, a pressure that warped the air and stole the oxygen. The gymnasium buzzed with the oblivious drone of the principal's speech, but for those seated near Marcus Thorne, the world had shrunk to the space between a decorated Marine and a security guard drunk on a thimbleful of power. Davis, the taller guard, had crossed a line. His words, sharp and dripping with condescension, were a direct challenge not just to the man, but to the uniform, to the 30 years of sacrifice it represented. "You think that uniform gives you a free pass," he'd hissed. And in that moment, the confrontation shifted from a petty squabble over a seat to a profound desecration of honor. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't rise. A lesser man would have erupted in anger, but Marcus Thorne was not a lesser man. Something inside him shifted, a series of tumblers clicking into place, locking away the father, the widower, the grieving husband, and leaving only the master gunnery sergeant. It was a cold, quiet transformation, a retreat into a fortress of self-control built brick by brick in the fires of places like Beirut, Mogadishu, and Fallujah. He had learned long ago that true battles are fought not with fists or shouts, but with an unyielding will. He turned his eyes back to the stage, his profile a mask of granite. The dismissal was absolute. It was more devastating than any curse he could have uttered. Across the gym, sitting near the top of the bleachers, Cole Jackson saw it all. He wasn't just a guest at his niece's graduation, he was a sentinel. He recognized the shift in his old master gun's demeanor instantly. He'd seen that look before, in the moments before a breach, in the quiet seconds before chaos was unleashed. He knew that Marcus was in complete control, but he also knew that men like Davis, men who mistake stillness for weakness, were dangerously unpredictable. This wasn't a fight Marcus should have to fight. Not here, not today. Honor, Cole knew, was not just a personal virtue, it was a communal responsibility. Excusing himself with a quiet word, Cole moved with a fluid grace that belied his size. He didn't storm down the aisle. He walked calmly toward the exit, his eyes constantly scanning, assessing. He pulled out his phone, his thumb moving with practiced speed. The call was answered on the first ring. The voice on the other end was familiar, steady. "Talk to me." "Heads up," Cole said, his voice a low, calm murmur that wouldn't carry. "We have a situation at Elmridge High. The Master Guns." There was a pause, a moment of silent, shared understanding. No questions were needed. The title, The Master Guns, was a call to arms in itself. "Yeah," Cole continued. "2 local badges trying to flex. Get the others. Just get here, quietly." He hung up. 5 other men, scattered across town after their morning reunion breakfast, received the message. Diaz, in his hotel room preparing to call his kids. Grant, window shopping for a gift for his wife. Each one heard the summons and moved without hesitation. There was no debate, no weighing of options. The call had been made. A debt of honor was being called in, a debt forged in the choking dust and blinding fire of a place none of them could ever forget. Fallujah, a decade ago. The city was a graveyard of broken concrete and twisted rebar. The air tasted of cordite and fear. Marcus Thorne's platoon was holding a 2-story building overlooking a street that the insurgents had turned into a shooting gallery. The order from command was clear. Hold the position at all costs. Do not break formation. Air support is en route. But the air support was a lie, a ghost on the radio to maintain morale while the real fight was happening block by bloody block. 2 streets over, Cole's 4-man Force Recon team was caught in a nightmare. A perfectly executed ambush had funneled them into a narrow alley, a brick-lined kill zone. One of his men was down, bleeding out from a leg wound. Their radio was a useless box of static. They were being systematically picked apart, the crack of sniper fire echoing off the walls, each shot getting closer. They were going to die there. Marcus heard the distant, distinct chatter of their rifles, a desperate, fading rhythm. He knew what it meant. He looked at his own men, their faces young, grim, and streaked with sweat and dirt. He looked at his map. He looked at the sky, empty of the promised support. Protocol said to stay. Survival said to stay. But leadership, true leadership, said something else entirely. He made a decision. It was audacious, reckless, and an act of profound, almost insane faith in his men. "Diaz," he had roared over the din, "set up the M240 on that window. Grant, you're with him. Lay down suppressing fire on that rooftop across the street. Everything you've got." His platoon sergeant stared at him, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Master Guns, our orders are to hold." "Our orders just changed," Marcus cut him off, his voice like iron. "I'm not losing a single man today. Not one. Leaving his flank dangerously exposed, Marcus took two of his best riflemen and burst out of the building. The street was a storm of bullets. They moved in a brutal, elegant ballet of violence, sprinting from the husk of a burned-out car to a pile of rubble, providing their own cover fire. The air was a hornet's nest of ricochets. Marcus felt a searing pain as a piece of shrapnel from a grenade tore through the flesh of his thigh, but he didn't break stride. He reached the mouth of the alley just as Cole was preparing his team for a final, suicidal charge. Marcus planted his feet, brought his rifle to his shoulder, and began to fire in controlled, devastating bursts, his shots driving the rooftop snipers to cover. "Recon, on me! Move now!" he bellowed, his voice a lifeline in the chaos. Cole, dragging his wounded man, led the charge out of the alley, his team falling in behind the impossible cover Marcus was providing. They made it back to the building, a frantic, gasping scramble. Marcus was the last one in, turning to fire a final burst down the street before collapsing through the doorway. He never mentioned his leg until the corpsman forced him to sit. He never filed a report that detailed his violation of a direct order. He had simply made a choice. His men were worth more than the rules. He had rewritten the terms of their survival with his own blood and courage. That was the debt. A debt that had no statute of limitations. Back in the bright, noisy gymnasium, that debt was beginning to be repaid. Diaz slipped in through a side door, his movements economical, his eyes taking in the entire room in a single sweeping glance before settling on the standoff in the third row. He found a spot on the bleachers, a silent, watchful presence. A moment later, Grant entered from the opposite side, melting into the crowd of parents. One by one they arrived, 5 ghosts in civilian clothes, a silent, invisible cordon of loyalty forming around their old leader. They didn't cluster. They didn't speak. They simply took up positions, their bodies relaxed, but their eyes missing nothing. They were a team again, their instincts taking over, their purpose singular. Mrs. Albright, watching from her seat, felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't know these men, but she recognized their kind. She had seen that same quiet, lethal competence in the eyes of the young Marines who had formed the honor guard at her own son's funeral. She knew she was witnessing something profound, a gathering of eagles. The guard, Davis, was oblivious. He was still locked in his petty battle of wills. He was about to escalate, to perhaps put a hand on Marcus's shoulder, when Cole re-entered the gym. He walked down the center aisle, his pace unhurried, each step a deliberate beat in the rising drama. He stopped a few feet away, forcing the guards to turn and face him. "Miller! Davis," Cole said, his voice calm and level. He had already assessed them, named them, and taken control of the space. Miller, the junior guard, was startled. "Can I help you, sir?" "No," Cole replied, his gaze unwavering, "but I'm about to help you. You're going to turn around, and you're going to walk back to the door you came in through. This conversation is over." Davis, bristling at the command in Cole's voice, stepped forward. "And who are you to tell us what to do?" Cole didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He took one small step closer, and the space around him seemed to crackle with a contained energy. His eyes, now hard as flint, locked onto Davis. "I'm the man who's telling you that you are 1 second away from making a mistake that will follow you for a very, very long time. You have chosen to disrespect a master gunnery sergeant of the United States Marine Corps in a room full of his brothers. Now, you have 2 choices." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You walk away from him in silence, or you stay, and you find out exactly what honoring a debt of honor looks like." As he spoke, from 5 different points across the gymnasium, Diaz, Grant, and the 3 other members of the team slowly, and in perfect unison, rose to their feet. The rustle of their movement was the only sound in a suddenly quiet section of the gym. The storm had broken, not with a roar of thunder, but with the silent, terrible power of a brotherhood forged in fire, ready to answer the call. The weight of their collective presence was about to fall, and the real lesson of the day was just beginning. The 5 standing men were not just a presence, they were a verdict. Their silent, collective judgment fell upon the 2 security guards with the force of an avalanche. The air in the gymnasium, already thick with unspoken tension, became heavy, charged with the weight of 30 years of shared history, of loyalty forged in places that existed only in nightmares and quiet reunions. Davis, the guard who had so casually dismissed a lifetime of service, now stood frozen, his petty authority crumbling under the silent, unwavering gaze of men for whom real authority was earned, not issued, with a polo shirt. His partner, Miller, looked desperately toward the principal, Mrs. Stevens, who was now hurrying down the aisle, her face a mask of frantic damage control. But before she could speak, before Davis could muster a response, a clear, resolute voice sliced through the tension. "That's enough." It was Mrs. Albright, the Gold Star mother, a woman whose grief had become her strength, had risen from her seat. She didn't walk with the hurried steps of the principal. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, each step heavy with purpose. She ignored the guards completely, as if they were irrelevant pieces of furniture. She walked directly to Marcus Thorne, and in a gesture that was both maternal and fiercely protective, placed a hand on the starched shoulder of his dress blues. The contact was gentle, but it was an anchor, a statement of alliance that shifted the entire dynamic of the room. She then turned her gaze, not on the fumbling guards, but directly on the principal. "Principal Stevens," Mrs. Albright said, and her voice, though not loud, carried the immense authority of her sacrifice. It was a voice that commanded respect. "This man is an honored guest in this building. His right to be in this seat was earned with a currency you and I can only try to comprehend. If there is a seating issue, then you will find another chair. These 2 men," she said, finally flicking a dismissive glance at Miller and Davis, "will leave him and this family section in peace. That is not a request." It was a checkmate. The principal, her face flushed, could only nod. "Yes, Mrs. Albright, of course." She turned to her guards, her voice a sharp, angry whisper. "Return to your posts at the entrance, now." Defeated and utterly outclassed, Davis and Miller turned and retreated, their shame a visible wake behind them. The standoff was over. The immediate threat had been neutralized not by the warriors in the room, but by the quiet, unyielding power of a mother who knew the true cost of the uniform. Marcus looked at Mrs. Albright, who gave his shoulder one last firm squeeze before returning to her seat. He offered a slow, profound nod. No words were needed. In that moment, they were not strangers. They were 2 souls joined in a shared, sacred understanding of service, sacrifice, and loss. From his place in the long line of graduates, Jamal Thorne had watched everything, his own ceremony forgotten. A storm of emotions raged inside him, white-hot anger at the guards, a fierce, soaring pride in his father's impossible calm, and a deep, aching helplessness. He had wanted to scream, to run over, to physically defend his father. But he had been held in place by a force he was only just beginning to understand. The sheer power of his father's self-control. It was a silent command that radiated across the gym, telling him, "Stay put. Handle your business. This is not your fight." And then he saw the other men stand, silent sentinels rising from the crowd. He saw the woman with the gold star intervene, and in that moment, Jamal's perception of his father fractured and reformed into something new, something larger and more complex. This was not just his dad, the man who was sometimes distant, the man who struggled to translate his warrior's heart into the soft language of fatherhood. This was a leader. This was a man whose presence could summon ghosts of loyalty, whose quiet dignity could inspire strangers to acts of courage. Jamal's mind, reeling, was pulled back in time, to a sun-drenched afternoon when he was 10 years old. The memory was sharp, edged with the sting of childhood disappointment. Marcus had been home from a deployment for less than a week. He was a ghost in his own house, moving through the rooms with a heavy silence, his eyes still holding the flat, dusty light of a foreign desert. Jamal's championship baseball game was that Saturday. It was all he had talked about for weeks. "My dad's coming! He's a Marine!" he had told everyone on his team. But Marcus, his internal clock still set to a war zone, had gotten the times confused. He showed up at the empty field an hour after the game had ended, an hour after Jamal and his team had celebrated their victory without him. The disappointment had been a physical blow. Jamal had refused to even look at his father that evening. Later, Marcus had come into his room. He didn't offer excuses about jet lag or stress. He sat on the edge of the bed, the championship trophy gleaming on Jamal's nightstand between them. He held a baseball in his hands, turning it over and over. "I failed the mission today, son," Marcus had said, his voice quiet and rough. "My job was to be there. I failed. There's no excuse for that." Jamal, still stinging, had just shrugged. "But here's the thing about failure," Marcus had continued, his gaze intense. "It's not the end. It's a lesson, the most important lesson." He held up the baseball. "You think this is about swinging a bat? It's not. It's about this space, right here." He held his hands about a foot apart. "This is the only thing in the whole world you control. You don't control the pitcher, you don't control the ump, you don't control the score. You only control your own focus, your own breathing, your own response. You quiet the noise, you see your target, and you execute. That's how you win, not just in baseball, in everything." At the time, the words had felt too big, too abstract. But now, standing in his graduation gown, watching his father execute that very lesson in front of 1,000 people, Jamal finally understood. His father had won. He hadn't thrown a punch, hadn't raised his voice. He had controlled his space. He had quieted the noise. He had won. This is the kind of moment that reminds us what true strength looks like. A lesson passed from one generation to the next. It's about more than just a ceremony. It's about character. If you've ever been inspired by a quiet act of profound integrity, let me know in the comments below what honor means to you. We believe these stories matter, and your voice is a part of that. The announcer's voice broke through his reverie, calling out a name, then another. The rhythm of the ceremony had been restored, but the energy in the room was different now. It was charged with a shared experience. Finally, the voice resonated with a new clarity. Jamal Thorne. A beat of silence, and then the gymnasium erupted. The applause wasn't just polite. It was a thunderous wave of sound, a spontaneous, unified roar of approval. People who had been strangers to Marcus and Jamal were on their feet, clapping, cheering. But, amidst the roar, another, more powerful tribute was taking place. Cole Jackson rose from his seat. Then Diaz. Then Grant. One by one, In a slow, coordinated ripple across the room, the 6 members of Marcus Thorne's old recon team stood. They did not clap. They did not cheer. They simply stood at a silent, perfect parade rest, their gazes fixed on the young man on the stage. It was not a formal salute, but it was the most profound one imaginable. It was a silent declaration to everyone in that room. This is the son of our brother, of our leader. He is one of us. We are here to witness and to honor his passage. The roaring applause slowly died down, replaced by a wave of hushed, reverent awe as everyone realized what they were seeing. In that powerful silence, Jamal Thorne walked across the stage. His shoulders were back, his head held high, his path illuminated by the weight of a legacy he was just beginning to comprehend. He shook the principal's hand, his grip firm, and accepted his diploma. He turned, his eyes scanning the crowd, passing over the hundreds of faces until he found the one that mattered. He found his father. Marcus Thorne sat in the 3rd row, a solitary, unmoving pillar of pride. He didn't stand, he didn't clap. He simply met his son's gaze, and in that shared look, a lifetime of love, sacrifice, and unspoken understanding passed between them. The ceremony was reaching its crescendo, but for a father and his son, the most important moment had just happened. A silent, powerful acknowledgement that some bonds can never be broken. The real conversation, the one that would cement the lessons of this day, was still to come. The last graduate's name echoed and faded. A wave of crimson caps flew into the air, a final, jubilant explosion that marked the end of one journey and the beginning of 1,000 others. The gymnasium, once a stage for high drama and quiet reverence, dissolved into a swirling, happy chaos of hugging families, flashing cameras, and triumphant shouts. For a long moment, Marcus Thorne remained seated, a pillar of stillness amidst the joyful storm. He watched Jamal get swept up in the tide of his classmates, a proud, beaming smile on his son's face. The mission was complete. The promise had been kept. As the crowd began to thin, the principal, Mrs. Stevens, approached him, her expression a mixture of deep remorse and newfound respect. The frantic administrative panic was gone, replaced by a humbling awareness of what she had witnessed. "Master Gunnery Sergeant Thorne," she said, her voice quiet and sincere. "There are no words to properly apologize for what happened today. It was a failure of our judgment, and it will be addressed." Marcus rose slowly, his towering presence commanding the space around them. He met her gaze, and she saw no anger, no resentment in his eyes, only a profound, weary grace. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble, "you have a fine group of young men and women graduating today. It was an honor to be here to see it." He offered no recrimination, no demands. A true leader understands that after a victory, the most powerful statement is magnanimity. He had not come for a fight, he had come for his son. And in the end, that was all that mattered. He found them waiting for him outside near the flagpole, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the asphalt. Cole, Diaz, Grant, and the others. His men. They weren't standing in formation. They were leaning against the brick wall, talking and laughing softly, looking for all the world like a group of ordinary fathers and uncles. But the way they held themselves, the easy economy of their movements, the way their eyes never stopped scanning their surroundings, that was a language only they shared. As Marcus approached, the laughter subsided, replaced by smiles of deep, abiding respect. Cole pushed off the wall and stepped forward, not with a formal salute, but with a firm, encompassing handshake that was a reunion in itself. "Figured you had it handled, Master Guns," Cole said, a grin playing on his lips. just providing overwatch. Marcus chuckled, a rare, warm sound. Your timing is as impeccable as ever, Jackson. Diaz, a man whose easy smile belied the warrior beneath, clapped Marcus on the back. Jamal's a good kid, got his mother's eyes, but he's got your backbone. They didn't rehash the confrontation in the gym. It was beneath them. Their bond wasn't built on discussing victories, but on the shared, unspoken knowledge of what it took to achieve them. Instead, they talked about life, about Diaz's daughter starting college, about Grant's new boat, about the quiet, everyday battles of mortgages and middle age. It was a comfortable, easy camaraderie, the effortless connection of men who had seen the worst of the world together and had come out the other side, forever linked by the invisible scars and the unpayable debts of brotherhood. When Jamal joined them, a diploma now clutched in his hand, a hush fell over the group. He stood before them, a young man on the threshold of his future, in the presence of his father's living past. Cole was the first to speak, extending a hand not to a boy, but to a fellow man. "Congratulations, Jamal," he said, his voice serious. "You did good today. You honored your father." One by one, they each shook his hand, their grips firm, their eyes conveying a message of acceptance and respect. It was an impromptu, sacred ceremony, an induction into a circle of honor that Jamal was only just beginning to understand. Later, the Charger rumbled down the highway, leaving the lights of Elm Ridge High behind them. The setting sun bled across the Texas sky, painting the clouds in fiery strokes of orange and gold. The diploma lay on the back seat, a silent testament to the day's official purpose. But the real graduation, the real lesson, had yet to be fully articulated. The car was a cocoon of quiet, the thrum of the engine a steady heartbeat. Finally, Jamal broke the silence, his voice filled with a new, searching curiosity. "Dad," he started, turning to look at his father's stoic profile. "I have to ask, back there with those guards, I've never seen you like that. You were so calm. I was about to lose it. I wanted to yell, to do something, but you just sat there. How?" This was it. This was the moment that mattered more than the diploma, more than the applause. This was the transfer of a legacy. Marcus kept his eyes on the road, but his focus was entirely on his son. "Jamal," he began, his voice taking on the steady, instructive cadence of a leader. "There is a vast difference between reacting and responding. You have to understand that to be a man." He glanced at Jamal, ensuring he had his full attention. Reacting is instinct. It's the animal part of us. It's what happens when you're pushed. Anger, fear, aggression, that's a reaction. It's what they wanted from me. They wanted me to yell, to get physical. They wanted me to lose my composure, because the second I did, I would have lost. I would have become the big angry man in a uniform that they already decided I was. I would have proven them right. The car ate up the miles, the white lines of the highway whipping by in a hypnotic rhythm. "But responding," Marcus continued, his voice dropping slightly, "responding is a choice. It's a discipline. It's the part of you that takes a breath while the world is screaming. It's the part that assesses the situation, quiets the noise in your own head, and makes a deliberate decision based on your principles, not your impulses. Responding is choosing to be the man you've decided to be, not the man someone else is trying to force you to become." He reached over and tapped the dashboard, where a small, faded photo of Elena was tucked into the trim. "Your mother. She was the master of the response, the strongest human being I ever knew. And she almost never raised her voice. Her power was in her stillness. She knew that dignity was a weapon that your enemies can never take from you unless you surrender it yourself. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. That uniform I was wearing, it's not a shield that gives me the right to demand respect. It's a responsibility that demands I give respect, even to those who don't deserve it. It means that in that moment, I wasn't just Marcus Thorne, a father. I was representing every Marine who ever wore these colors. I was representing men like Cole and Diaz and countless others who are no longer with us. My response had to be worthy of them. The real fight today wasn't with those two guards in their cheap polo shirts. The real fight was right here, he said, tapping his own heart with his fingertips. It was the battle to uphold my promise to your mother, to be the man I want her son to see, and to honor the code I've lived by for 30 years. That's the only battle that mattered. Jamal stared out his window at the darkening landscape, but he wasn't seeing it. He was seeing his father in a new light, not as a distant figure of authority, but as a man of profound, complex strength. He saw the quiet struggles, the immense discipline, the deep well of love and honor that fueled his impossible calm. He finally understood. "So, when they stood up for you," Jamal said softly, "it wasn't just because you're their friend." "No," Marcus said, "it's because they knew I would have done the same for them. It's because we all fought for something bigger than ourselves, and we refused to let the world make us small. Loyalty, son, is the final objective. You earn it under fire, and you carry it for the rest of your life." The Charger sped on into the twilight, a vessel carrying a father and a son, but also a legacy, now fully passed on. The diploma on the back seat was made of paper and ink. But the lesson Jamal received that day was forged in fire, tempered by love, and built to last a lifetime. He had learned that the loudest man in the room is often the weakest, and that true strength is measured by the battles you win inside yourself. The story of Master Gunnery Sergeant Thorne and the silent salute of his brothers is a powerful reminder that the greatest legacies are not what we leave for people, but what we leave in them. If this story of quiet integrity and unshakable honor moved you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the very best of our nation's heroes. Thank you for watching.